The $100 Seed, A Trader's Journey to Millions. Marcus stared at the glowing screen in his cramped studio apartment. The numbers didn't lie. Account balance, $94.32. 3 months ago, it had been $100. He'd lost more than money in those 3 months. He'd lost sleep, confidence, and nearly his sanity. His hands trembled as he reached for the mouse, ready to close another position too early, ready to chase another setup that wasn't quite right, ready to prove to the market that he deserved to win. But something stopped him. A memory. A conversation he'd had with an old trader named Vincent at a coffee shop 2 weeks earlier. Vincent had been sitting alone, reading a worn paperback about market psychology, and Marcus, desperate for guidance, had introduced himself. What Vincent told him that day would change everything. The market doesn't care about your feelings, kid. It's just a mirror. And right now, it's showing you exactly who you are. The question is, are you willing to become someone different? Marcus pulled his hand away from the mouse. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, the chart was still there, the numbers unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't going to click. Not today. Not until he understood what Vincent had really meant. The compounding seed. Vincent had been clear about one thing. Your $100 isn't nothing. It's a seed, and you don't eat the seed. You plant it. At first, Marcus thought this was just motivational nonsense, the kind of thing trading gurus say to keep you hopeful while they sell you courses. But as days passed and he watched himself sabotage trade after trade, he began to understand. The problem wasn't his technical analysis. The problem was that he treated his small account like it was expendable. Every trade felt like a lottery ticket. Risk 50%, maybe it doubles. Risk 30%, maybe it triples. He was playing roulette with spreadsheets and candlesticks, and just like roulette, the house always won in the end. The market had taken his money, but worse, it had taken his respect for the process. He'd been digging up the seed every single day to see if it had grown, and in doing so, he'd destroyed any chance of real growth. Marcus decided to try something radical. He would aim for just 5% per week. On $94, that was less than $5. Pathetic, right? His friends were posting screenshots of 200% gains on social media. One guy claimed he'd turned $500 into $8,000 in 2 weeks. Marcus used to envy those posts. Now, sitting in the quiet of his apartment at 2 a.m., he realized something. He had no idea if those traders still had their accounts a month later. He had no idea how many times they'd blown up before that one win. He only saw the highlight reel, never the graveyard of failed attempts behind it. 5% per week. He wrote it on a sticky note and placed it on the edge of his monitor. It felt embarrassingly small, but he committed. If he could do this consistently, the math was undeniable. $94 growing at 5% weekly would become $10,000 in less than 5 years. And if he kept the same discipline with $10,000, it would become 6 figures, then 7. The numbers felt impossible, but the principle was simple. Growth multiplied over time creates miracles. The problem was, most traders never gave time a chance to work. The first week under his new system was torture. He saw 3 setups that almost fit his rules. Almost. The old Marcus would have jumped in, convinced himself it was close enough, and probably lost. The new Marcus, the one trying to plant seeds instead of gambling, watched those setups pass. He took no trades that week, 0 profit, but also 0 loss. And for the first time in months, he felt something strange. Control. Week 2 brought a perfect setup, clean support level, Confluence with his moving averages, risk to reward of 1 to 3. He risked 2% of his account exactly as planned. The trade played out over 4 days, hitting his target while he slept. When he woke up and saw the closed position, he'd made $5.80. It wasn't life-changing money. It wouldn't even cover his morning coffee. But something about it felt different. He hadn't forced it. He hadn't chased it. He'd simply waited for the market to come to him. For the first time, Marcus understood what Vincent meant. The seed was beginning to sprout, not because he'd watered it with desperation, but because he'd given it the conditions it needed to grow. The waiting game. By month 3, Marcus's account had grown to $127. It wasn't the explosion he'd once dreamed of, but it was progress. Real, measurable, consistent progress. More importantly, he was beginning to develop something he'd never had before: ruthless patience. And it was ruthless because it demanded he ignore every instinct screaming at him to act. One afternoon, Marcus sat at his desk watching the market chop sideways for hours. The price was dancing just outside his entry zone, teasing him, tempting him to jump in early. Just a few pips, what's the difference? His brain whispered. But Marcus had learned the hard way that a few pips was the difference between discipline and disaster. He thought back to a story Vincent had told him about a trader in 2003 who only took 4 trades a month. 4. That trader would wait 23 days without a single position, and then, when his exact setup appeared, he'd strike with precision and size. That one trade often made more than impatient traders made all month. If the market will still be here tomorrow, why should I rush today? Vincent had said. Quoting that trader, Marcus repeated those words to himself now, his hands hovering over the keyboard, aching to click. The market didn't care about his boredom. It didn't care that he felt unproductive. In an office, productivity meant action. In trading, the most productive thing you could do was sometimes nothing at all. He closed his laptop and went for a walk. When he returned 2 hours later, the price had moved exactly where he'd hoped, but he'd missed the entry. For a moment, the old panic returned. See, you should have taken it. But then he remembered something else Vincent had said. A good process will sometimes let winners go. That's not a flaw. That's the price of survival. Your job is not to catch every winner. Your job is to take only the trades that fit your edge. Marcus opened his trading journal and wrote, "Missed trade today. Entry criteria not met. Stay disciplined. This is a win." It felt strange writing that, but he knew it was true. The market would give him another opportunity. It always did. The question was whether he'd still have capital and mental clarity when that opportunity came. Impatient traders blew up their accounts chasing ghosts. Patient traders survived long enough to catch the real thing. Days turned into weeks. Marcus found himself taking fewer trades, but his win rate climbed. 40%, then 55%, then in one remarkable month, 68%. It wasn't because his strategy had changed. It was because his patience had. He was no longer forcing setups that were close enough. He was waiting for the ones that were undeniable, and when those appeared, he executed without hesitation. There was a moment during this period that tested everything. Marcus had gone 19 days without a single trade. His account sat at $183, and he was agonizing over whether he'd become too conservative, too scared. Then, on day 20, he saw it. The setup was textbook perfect. Every indicator aligned, every condition met. He entered with 2% risk, and over the next week, the trade moved in his favor like a freight train. When it hit his target, he'd made $22 in a single position. On a percentage basis, it was his best trade ever. Not because of luck, but because he'd waited for absolute clarity. That night, Marcus called Vincent. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said. Vincent laughed, a deep, knowing sound. "You're not there yet, kid. Patience is just the beginning. Wait until the market punches you in the face. Then we'll see if you really understand." The mirror's reflection. The punch came 3 weeks later. Marcus had built his account to $241, and he was feeling invincible. His strategy was working. His patience was paying off. He'd even started telling a few friends about his progress, something he'd promised himself he wouldn't do. Pride, as it turned out, was the crack in the armor. He took a trade that looked perfect on paper. All his rules were met. He risked his usual 2%, expecting another smooth winner. But the market had other plans. Within hours, the trade reversed violently. Stop loss hit. $4.82 gone. It wasn't a huge loss in dollar terms, but the psychological impact was immediate. Marcus felt the old, familiar rage bubbling up. How could this happen? He'd done everything right. Then came the whisper, "You need to make that back. Right now. There's a setup forming. It's not perfect, but it's close enough." Marcus's hand moved toward the mouse. This was the moment, the exact moment where traders destroy themselves. He knew it intellectually, but emotionally he was on fire. The loss felt personal, like the market had insulted him, and he wanted revenge. His finger hovered over the buy button. The setup wasn't clean. There was resistance overhead. The volume was weak. But his brain didn't care about any of that. It cared about erasing the pain. Just as he was about to click, his phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. "How's the seed growing?" Marcus froze. He looked at the text, then at the chart, then back at the text. The seed. He'd almost just ripped it out of the ground in a fit of emotion. He closed the trading platform, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. This was what Vincent had warned him about. The emotional detachment test. Over the next hour, Marcus forced himself to process what had happened. The loss wasn't an attack. It was part of the game. If his strategy was profitable over 100 trades, one loss was just noise in the data. He'd made 8 winning trades in the past month. This was loss number 3. The math still favored him, but only if he didn't sabotage himself by breaking his rules in a desperate attempt to feel better. He opened his journal and wrote, "Lost $4.82 today. Wanted revenge. Didn't take it. This is growth." As he wrote those words, something shifted. The anger began to fade. He realized that the loss wasn't the problem. The problem was his belief that he shouldn't lose. That belief was the enemy. It made every loss feel catastrophic instead of routine. Vincent had told him about a trader in 2008 who made $400,000 short in bank stocks during the financial crisis. Perfect timing. Perfect strategy. Then one bad day cost him $50,000, and he lost his mind. He started revenge trading, doubling down, chasing losses. Within 3 months, all the profits were gone. The market hadn't ruined him. His inability to emotionally accept being wrong had ruined him. Marcus decided that night to reframe how he thought about losses. They weren't failures. They were business expenses. If you owned a restaurant and had to throw away a few meals because orders got canceled, you wouldn't shut down the restaurant. You'd keep serving, knowing the overall business would be profitable. Trading was the same. Losses were simply the cost of doing business. Over the following weeks, Marcus practiced this detachment religiously. When he won, He didn't celebrate wildly. When he lost, he didn't spiral into frustration. He focused on one thing: executing his plan exactly as written. Win or lose, his job was to follow the process. The market would handle the rest. And slowly, something remarkable happened. His decisions became sharper. He stopped hesitating on good setups and stopped chasing bad ones. The noise in his head quieted down, replaced by a calm, clinical focus. One evening, Marcus looked at his account, $319. In 6 months, he'd more than tripled his starting capital, but more importantly, he'd rebuilt himself as a trader. The wins felt good, but they didn't define him. The losses still stung, but they didn't destroy him. He'd learned to detach his identity from individual outcomes and attach it instead to his process. That shift, more than any strategy or indicator, was the key to everything. The shapeshifter. Just when Marcus thought he'd figured it out, the market changed. Volatility spiked. His usual setup started failing at a higher rate. Patterns that had been reliable for months suddenly produced whipsaws and false breaks. His win rate dropped from 65% to 48% in 2 weeks. The old Marcus would have panicked, convinced his strategy was broken. The new Marcus recognized what was happening. The game had changed, and he needed to adapt. He called Vincent. "The market's different now," Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice. "My setups aren't working like they used to." Vincent's response was blunt. "Good. This is where most traders die. They fall in love with one method and ride it into the ground. The market doesn't care about your favorite setup. It rewards those who flow with it, not against it." "So what do I do?" Marcus asked. "You become a shapeshifter," Vincent said. "You treat your strategy like a tool, not an identity. When the tool stops working, you don't cry about it. You pick up a different one." Marcus spent the next 2 weeks studying the new market conditions. High volatility meant faster moves and wider stop losses. Trending patterns were weaker, but range-bound plays were stronger. He adjusted his approach. Instead of waiting for breakout trades, he started focusing on mean reversion setups. Instead of holding for large targets, he took quicker profits. It felt uncomfortable at first, like learning to write with his opposite hand. But the results spoke for themselves. His win rate climbed back to 58%, and his account continued to grow. This was the mindset Vincent had called relentless adaptation. The market was a living, breathing beast. It evolved constantly, punishing those who stayed static and rewarding those who could change without ego. Marcus realized that his journey wasn't about finding one perfect system. It was about developing the mental flexibility to shift strategies as conditions demanded. He thought about a trader Vincent had mentioned, Marty Schwartz, known as Pitbull. Schwartz was a legend in stock index futures, but when the market changed, he didn't cling to the old ways. He expanded his skill set, studied new markets, adjusted his risk models. That ability to evolve kept him profitable, while others who refused to change lost everything. Success wasn't just skill, it was the refusal to stay static. Marcus also began adapting to himself. Some days he felt sharp and focused, ready to execute multiple trades. Other days he was tired or distracted. The old Marcus would have forced trades anyway, believing discipline meant trading no matter what. The new Marcus understood that discipline also meant knowing when not to trade. On low-energy days, he either sat out entirely or reduced his position size. This wasn't weakness, it was tactical awareness. By month 9, Marcus's account had crossed $1,000. It was a psychological milestone. 4 figures. He'd grown his capital more than tenfold, not through luck or gambling, but through a series of small, disciplined decisions compounded over time. More importantly, he'd proven to himself that he could adapt when the market threw curveballs. He wasn't the same trader who'd started with $100. He'd been forced to reinvent himself multiple times, and each reinvention had made him stronger. One night, as Marcus reviewed his trading journal, he noticed a pattern. Every major growth period had come after a phase of adaptation. Every plateau had been broken by a willingness to change. The market wasn't just teaching him about charts and price action, it was teaching him about evolution. Species that adapt survive. Species that don't go extinct. Trading was no different. Vincent called him out of the blue one evening. "How's the seed?" he asked. Marcus smiled. "It's growing. Slowly, but it's growing." Vincent's voice carried a note of approval. "Good. But remember, kid, adaptation never stops. The beginner who learns risk management must become the intermediate trader who masters emotions. And that trader must become the advanced trader who reads market psychology instinctively. Every level demands a different version of you. The moment you think you've arrived, you're already falling behind." Marcus understood. The journey from $100 to $1,000,000 wasn't a straight line. It was a series of transformations. Each stage required shedding old beliefs and adopting new ones. The Marcus who risked 50% per trade had to die so the disciplined trader could emerge. The impatient Marcus had to die so the patient one could thrive. The emotionally reactive Marcus had to die so the detached one could execute with clarity. And now, the rigid Marcus had to die so the adaptive one could survive long term. The breaking point. Month 11 was when everything almost fell apart. Marcus's account had reached 1,347, and he'd started to believe he was invincible. 7 consecutive winning weeks had inflated his confidence into something dangerous. He'd stopped journaling as religiously. He'd started checking his account balance multiple times a day, watching the numbers climb, imagining what he'd do with 10,000, with 50,000, with 1,000,000. Then the market reminded him who was really in control. It started on a Monday. Marcus took a trade that met all his criteria: clean setup, proper risk management, 2% on the line. By Tuesday morning, the position had moved against him violently. Stop loss hit, down $27. No big deal, he thought. Part of the game. But then he saw another setup, and this one looked even better. He jumped in, convinced he'd make back the loss, and then some. By Wednesday afternoon, that trade was also stopped out. Another $28 gone. Marcus felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the old demon whispering in his ear. "You're better than this. The market is wrong. Double down. Make it back." He knew these thoughts were poison, but they felt so convincing in the moment. Thursday, he broke his own rules. He saw a setup that was only 70% aligned with his criteria, not the 100% he required. He took it anyway, but this time he risked 4% instead of 2%. "I need to catch up," he told himself. The market didn't care about his needs. By Friday, he was down another $54. In 1 week, he'd lost $109. His account balance, 1,238. But worse than the money was what had happened to his mind. He wasn't sleeping. He was checking charts at 3 a.m. He'd snapped at a coworker over nothing. He couldn't focus on anything except the burning need to prove he wasn't a failure. This was the spiral Vincent had warned him about, the one that destroyed accounts and traders alike. Friday night, Marcus sat in the dark, staring at his monitor. His hand hovered over the mouse. There was one more setup. It wasn't clean, but he could force it to work. He could use tighter stops, higher leverage. One good trade and he'd be back to $400. One good trade and the pain would stop. His phone rang. Vincent. Marcus almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. How's the seed? Vincent's voice was calm, almost casual. Marcus's throat tightened. I'm down $109 this week. I lost over 8% in 5 days. I broke every rule I made. The words came out broken, defeated. Silence on the other end. Then Vincent spoke, and his tone was different now. Harder. Good. You needed this. Marcus felt anger flash through him. Good. I just destroyed a month of progress. How is that good? Because now you know, Vincent said. Now you know what it feels like when the market breaks you. And you have a choice. You can let it finish the job, or you can remember why you started this journey in the first place. Marcus wanted to argue, but Vincent kept talking. Let me tell you a story, kid. Something I've never told you before. Vincent's fall. 15 years ago, Vincent began, I was where you want to be. I'd turned $5,000 into $2.1 million over 8 years. Everyone called me a genius. I called myself one too. I had the house, the car, the respect. I thought I'd figured out the market. I thought I was untouchable. Vincent's voice grew quieter. Then 2008 hit. The financial crisis. I'd been trading the same strategy for years, and it had worked flawlessly in stable markets. But when volatility exploded, I didn't adapt. I held on to my positions, convinced the market would come back. I added to losing trades, sure that I was buying the dip. Every rule I'd built my fortune on, I abandoned. Not because I didn't know better, but because my ego couldn't accept that conditions had changed. Marcus listened, hardly breathing. In 6 months, Vincent continued, I lost $1.8 million. By the end of that year, I was down to $47,000. I'd given back nearly everything. My wife left. My friends disappeared. I sat in an empty apartment with a near-empty account, and I had to decide. Was I going to quit, or was I going to figure out what the hell went wrong? What did you do? Marcus asked. I went back to basics, Vincent said. I took that $47,000 and treated it like it was my first $100 all over again. I rebuilt my discipline. I relearned patience. I stripped away my ego and admitted that I'd been a fool. It took me 4 years to get back to $1 million. 4 years of doing everything the hard way, the right way. No shortcuts, no revenge trading, just slow, painful growth. Vincent paused. You lost $109 this week because you forgot who you were. You started acting like the market owed you something. It doesn't. But here's the gift in this pain. You caught yourself before you blew up completely. Your account is still alive. Your mind is still salvageable. The question is, are you going to learn from this, or are you going to keep bleeding until there's nothing left? Marcus felt something shift in his chest. The anger drained away, replaced by clarity. I'm going to learn, he said quietly. I'm going to go back to the process. Good, Vincent said. Then here's what you do. Close the platform. Don't trade for 1 week. I don't care if you see the setup of the century. You need to detox from the emotional damage you just took. Journal every day about what went wrong and why. And when you come back, you start with 1% risk per trade, not 2%. You've lost your trust in yourself. You need to earn it back. Slowly. Marcus did exactly that. The next week was agony. He watched the market move without him, saw setups that would have been winners, felt the FOMO burning in his veins. But he didn't trade. He wrote in his journal every morning and every night, dissecting his mistakes, confronting his ego, rebuilding his mental foundation. When he returned to trading the following Monday, something was different. He wasn't desperate anymore. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just a trader executing a plan. His first trade back was a small winner, $9. It felt better than any $50 win he'd had before because he'd earned it the right way. The mirror doesn't lie. As Marcus rebuilt his confidence over the following months, he began to notice patterns not just in the market, but in his own behavior. The market truly was a mirror, reflecting back every flaw, every weakness, every moment of indiscipline. When he was patient, the market rewarded him with clear setups. When he was greedy, it punished him with whipsaws and false breaks. When he was fearful, it showed him missed opportunities that would have worked. One afternoon, Marcus met up with an old friend from college, Mike. They'd both started trading around the same time, and Mike had been posting impressive screenshots on social media for months. Luxury watches, stacks of cash, charts showing massive wins. Marcus had felt a twinge of envy every time he saw those posts. Over coffee, Mike talked about his latest wins. "Bro, I turned $800 into $12,000 last month. I'm telling you, this new strategy is insane. High leverage, quick scalps. I'm making more in a day than I used to make in a month." His eyes were bright with excitement, but there was something else there too. A kind of manic energy that Marcus recognized. He'd felt it himself during his worst weeks. "That's impressive," Marcus said carefully. "What's your drawdown been like?" Mike waved the question away. "Who cares about drawdowns when you're printing money? You gotta take risks to make real money, man. You're still doing that slow and steady thing, right? How's that working out?" Marcus thought about his account. It had taken him 14 months to grow from $100 to $2,100. Not sexy, not Instagram-worthy, but sustainable. "It's working," he said simply. Mike leaned in, lowering his voice. "Look, I'll be honest. I've blown up 3 accounts in the past year, but each time I came back stronger. You can't be afraid to lose. That's the difference between winners and guys who stay small forever." Marcus saw it then. Mike wasn't trading. He was gambling. The wins were real, but they were built on a foundation of sand. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. Marcus had been down that road. He knew exactly where it led. "What's your longest winning streak?" Marcus asked. 4 weeks, Mike said proudly. "And your longest losing streak?" Mike's smile faltered slightly. "I don't really track that. Probably a week or 2. Marcus nodded. Mike was flying blind, no real plan, no understanding of his own psychology, just raw emotion and leverage. 3 months later, Marcus saw Mike post on social media that he was taking a break from trading to focus on other opportunities. Translation: he'd blown up again, and this time, he might not come back. The encounter crystallized something for Marcus. There were 2 types of traders in this game. Those who treated it like a casino, chasing the high of big wins and ignoring the crashes in between, and those who treated it like a business focused on consistent execution and long-term survival. The casino traders made for great social media content. The business traders built actual wealth. Marcus knew which one he was becoming, and more importantly, he knew why Mike's path would never work. It wasn't about intelligence or even strategy. It was about mindset. Mike was trying to extract from the market. Marcus was trying to grow with it. One approach was parasitic, the other was symbiotic. The $10,000 thresholded month. 18 brought a milestone Marcus had dreamed about since day 1. His account crossed $10,000. He stared at the number on his screen, and a wave of emotion washed over him. Not joy or excitement, but something deeper. Gratitude. He'd turned $100 into 5 figures through nothing but discipline, patience, and an obsessive commitment to growth. But crossing $10,000 also brought new psychological challenges. Suddenly, every trade felt heavier. A 2% loss was no longer $4, it was $200. The same percentage, but the emotional weight was completely different. Marcus found himself hesitating on setups that would have been automatic decisions at $1,000. His brain was screaming at him that he had too much to lose now, that he should be more conservative, more careful. He called Vincent. "I hit 10,000, Marcus said. But I'm trading worse now than I was at $2,000. I keep second-guessing myself." Vincent laughed, not unkindly. "Welcome to the next level. This is where traders discover that money is just a number, but fear is real. You're afraid of losing what you've built. That fear will paralyze you if you let it." "So what do I do?" "You remember that it's still just 2%, Vincent said. "You're not risking $10,000. You're risking $200, the same way you risked $4 when you had $100. The percentage doesn't change. Your strategy doesn't change. The only thing that changed is your emotional attachment to the number. So you detach. Again, just like you learned before." Vincent was right. The challenge wasn't technical, it was psychological. Marcus had to relearn emotional detachment at this new level. He started by reducing his position size temporarily, going back to 1% risk until his mind adjusted to seeing 5 figures in his account. It felt like a step backwards, but it was actually a strategic retreat to maintain his mental clarity. Within a month, he'd recalibrated. $10,000 started to feel normal instead of precious. He moved back to 2% risk and resumed his systematic execution. His win rate, which had dipped during the adjustment period, climbed back to 61%. The account continued growing, slower at times, faster at others, but always forward. One evening, Marcus calculated what his account would be worth if he could maintain his average monthly return of 6% for the next 3 years. The number made him dizzy. Over $160,000. And if he could hold that pace for 5 more years after that, over $2 million. The compounding mindset he'd adopted in month 1 was no longer theoretical. It was mathematical destiny, as long as he could keep his mind disciplined enough to let it unfold. The transformation. By month 24, Marcus's life looked completely different. His account had grown to $31,000, but the changes went far beyond the money. He woke up without anxiety. He no longer checked his phone obsessively. He could hold conversations without mentally replaying trades. The constant background noise of stress and fear that had defined his first year of trading had been replaced by a quiet confidence. His relationship with his girlfriend Sarah had improved dramatically. She'd almost left him during those dark early months when he was consumed by the market, when every dinner conversation turned into a rant about some trade that got away. Now he could close the platform at 6 p.m. and actually be present. Sarah noticed the change. "You're different now," she told him one night. "Calmer, like you're not at war with yourself anymore." She was right. The internal battle that had raged for so long, the constant argument between the disciplined trader and the desperate gambler, had finally been won. The disciplined trader was now in full control, and the gambler was just a faint memory. A cautionary tale, Marcus told himself when he felt old patterns trying to resurface. Vincent called less frequently now, not because he'd lost interest, but because Marcus didn't need the constant guidance anymore. Their relationship had evolved from teacher-student to something more like colleagues. When they did speak, Vincent would often ask Marcus's opinion on market conditions, genuinely curious about his perspective. That shift meant more to Marcus than any profit he'd made. One Saturday morning, Marcus met Vincent at their usual coffee shop. The old man looked him over and nodded approvingly. "You did it, kid. You actually did it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "I'm not a millionaire yet." "No," Vincent said, "but you became a trader. A real one. Most people never get there. They spend years, sometimes decades, stuck in the same destructive patterns, never making the internal changes necessary to survive long term. You made those changes in 2 years. That's rare." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "The money is coming. It's inevitable now. You've built the mindset. You've survived the psychological gauntlet. You've proven you can adapt when conditions change. You've detached your ego from outcomes. The compound growth curve you're on doesn't stop at $31,000. It goes as far as your discipline can carry it." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," he admitted, "like the market is going to find a way to take it all back." "It will try," Vincent said bluntly. "There will be drawdowns. There will be months where nothing works. But you know how to handle those now. You've been through the fire. The version of you that would have panicked and blown up the account 2 years ago. That person doesn't exist anymore. You killed him. And that's the secret nobody talks about. Successful trading isn't about finding the perfect strategy. It's about becoming a different person. You have to kill the weak parts of yourself and rebuild from discipline and patience." They sat in silence for a moment, watching people walk by outside the window. Finally, Marcus spoke. "When do you know you've really made it?" Vincent smiled. "When you stop asking that question. When you realize that the journey is the destination. You're not trading to reach some magical number where you can stop. You're trading because you've become the kind of person who can do this. The money is just proof that you evolved." Marcus thought about the small studio apartment he'd started in, staring at $94 with trembling hands, feeling like a failure. He thought about the losses, the sleepless nights, the moments where he'd almost quit. Every one of those moments had been necessary. They'd forged him into someone capable of managing $31,000 with the same discipline he'd once struggled to apply to $100. As Marcus walked home that afternoon, he pulled out his phone and opened his trading journal. He wrote, "2 years ago I had $100 and a desperate wish to get rich quick. Today, I have $31,000 and the understanding that getting rich quick was never the goal. The goal was to become someone who could handle wealth, someone who could think in decades, not days, someone who could sit in front of the market without fear or greed, just execution. I'm not there yet, but I'm no longer the person I was. And that's the only metric that truly matters." He closed the journal and looked up at the sky. The market would open again Monday morning. There would be new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to either honor his discipline or betray it. But Marcus was ready. Not because he knew what the market would do, but because he knew who he'd become. The trader who started with $100 wasn't trying to find a shortcut to $1 million anymore. He was building an empire, one disciplined decision at a time. And empires, he'd learned, weren't built in days. They were built in decades. The seed he'd planted 2 years ago was now a tree, strong enough to weather any storm, deep-rooted enough to keep growing no matter what chaos swirled around it. The long game. 2 years after that conversation with Vincent in the coffee shop, Marcus sat in a different apartment. This one had 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a view of the city. His trading account had grown to $47,000. It wasn't a million yet, but the trajectory was undeniable. More importantly, he'd developed something priceless, a mindset that could survive anything the market threw at him. He still remembered those early days, staring at $94, feeling like a failure. If someone had told him then that patience, discipline, emotional detachment, and adaptation would be worth more than any strategy, he would have laughed. Everyone wanted the secret indicator, the perfect entry technique, the holy grail system. But Marcus had learned the hard way that the real edge wasn't on the chart. It was in the mind. The compounding mindset had taught him to respect every dollar, to see his small account not as a limitation but as a training ground. Ruthless patience had taught him that doing nothing was often the most profitable action. Emotional detachment had taught him that no single trade mattered, only the cumulative result of disciplined execution. And relentless adaptation had taught him that survival in the market required constant evolution. Marcus thought about all the traders who'd started their journeys around the same time he did. Most had quit. A few were still stuck in the same destructive patterns, blowing up accounts and blaming the market. Only a handful had survived and grown. The difference wasn't intelligence or access to better tools. The difference was mindset. The survivors had learned to see trading as a game of self-mastery, not market prediction. One afternoon, Marcus met Vincent for coffee. The old man looked at him with quiet pride. "You've come a long way, kid," Vincent said. "But let me ask you something. What's the biggest change you made?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I stopped trying to beat the market," he said. "I started trying to beat my old self. Every day I just tried to be a little more disciplined, a little more patient, a little less emotional than the day before. The market took care of the rest." Vincent nodded. "That's the secret most traders never learn. The market is a mirror. It doesn't care about your hopes, your fears, or your bank account. It just reflects back the truth about how disciplined you are. If you're chaotic, it shows you chaos. If you're patient, it shows you opportunities. If you're adaptive, it shows you paths forward. The moment you understand that, trading stops being about predicting price and starts being about mastering yourself." Marcus finished his coffee and stood to leave. As he walked out, Vincent called after him. "Hey, kid, what are you going to do when you hit 1 million?" Marcus turned and smiled. "Keep planting seeds, because the journey doesn't end at 1 million. It ends when I stop growing." Vincent raised his cup in a silent toast, and Marcus walked out into the sunlight, ready for whatever the market had waiting for him next. The seed he'd planted 2 years ago with $100 had grown into something far more valuable than money. It had grown into a mindset that could weather any storm, adapt to any condition, and compound over decades. That mindset was the real fortune. The money was just a byproduct. And as Marcus opened his laptop to review the day's charts, he felt something he'd never felt in those early desperate days. Peace. Not because the journey was over, but because he finally understood that the journey itself was the reward. The market would still test him. There would be losses, drawdowns, and moments of doubt. But Marcus knew something now that he didn't know before. He wasn't trading to escape his life. He was trading to master his mind. And in that mastery, he'd found something more valuable than any amount of money could buy: freedom. The freedom to think clearly under pressure, to act decisively without emotion, to adapt without ego, and to grow without limits. That night, Marcus updated his trading journal one last time before bed. Account balance, 47,283. But the real balance, immeasurable. I started with $100 and the belief that trading was about predicting the market. I was wrong. Trading is about becoming the kind of person the market rewards. Disciplined, patient, detached, adaptive. I'm not there yet. But I'm no longer the trader I was, and that's the only victory that matters. He closed the journal, turned off the monitor, and went to sleep. Tomorrow, the market would open again, and Marcus would be ready. Not because he knew what it would do, but because he knew who he'd become. The trader who turned $100 into a fortune wasn't the one who found a perfect system. It was the one who became a different person, one disciplined decision at a time. And that transformation, more than any trade or any profit, was the true journey from $100 to $1 million.